Hi there, welcome to the first social chat that we're going to be having approximately weekly, depending, with a various rogues gallery of characters. Today I've brought, well, I'm Brad. Hi. I've brought in Eric Portelance and Jon Crowley, both strategists here at Klick. And we're going to be talking about the stuff that came out in the Klick Wire this week, and maybe some other things that turn up. So the first item we've got is the article in The Economist, very highfalutin, about the Google's chief economist, Hal Varian. So he was talking about how Google looks at nowcasting in terms of, pulling up data immediately to get insights into the economy. But at minute 7:11, the conversation turns to Google consumer surveys. So as a research guy, I think this is could be a good tool to quickly get, quick hits, quick snippets of opinion.
So what's the sort of 10-second pitch on how these surveys work?
So the 10-second pitch is, instead of you get to a paywall, and instead of having a subscription, you can click on a button and answer 1, 2, 3, 4 questions very quickly. It's got to be less, obviously less than a minute. It's less than 30 seconds, and that when you answer those questions, you can then get past the paywall, read your article. So that's the deal.
So you're trading your own kind of information about your habits and preferences in return for content that would otherwise be paid.
That's right.
I find this really interesting because the competing models between Google and Facebook in terms of advertising have always been that Google looks at what you've actually done and what you're actually searching for. Facebook looks at self-reporting. It looks at what you say you're interested in, what you say you like. So this is Google stepping into some of that territory, which could be very valuable as an advertiser looking for a little more insight into what people are digging into.
You know what's interesting about the magazine industry is that one of the big objections that they've had with the way Apple is running the newsstand app in the App Store is that they no longer get direct access to subscriber data. And that's been an issue for them because the relationship is actually with Apple, that you're paying Apple for the magazine and then Apple's paying them as sort of the intermediate. So, for publications that are trying to look for that missing kind of gap where they would usually have all this, zip code and income and all of these things where you would kind of check off these boxes when you're subscribing to a magazine, that maybe this is kind of one potential way for them to get that data stream back.
Fair enough. That's actually one of the things I've always found ironic, that people are so worried about social media taking and selling their information to advertisers, even though the print media industry has been doing this for as long as subscription has existed.
Yeah, and John, your comment earlier about what people say they do versus what they do, that's interesting too. If you go to this article, inside the article they actually talk about that quite a bit. And that people don't have good insight into what they really do. So what they say they do is not necessarily what they really do. Google is good at saying is good at pointing out what they actually do. So these questions are going to be most valuable in terms of opinions and attitudes.
Definitely.
What's in it for Google? Are they making money off of these surveys?
Yes.
They're also using the data and...
Well, the idea is that it's like AdWords. You pay to have your survey up there, and then you get the data.
Gotcha.
So, online, another thing that happened this week last week, was ICANN's reveal day in terms of the new top-level domains, dot whatevers. And so they released that on Wednesday, and there's been no end of conversation about it. In fact, we have an entire blog post about it. Click back and you can see that. So you guys have seen the data come out. What are your opinions about the companies that signed up?
I actually expected to see more companies spring for it than actually did. I mean, I can understand that behaviors have been kind of laid out to the point where lots of people don't want to step too far away from the .com that people consider the standard way to find a website. I still find it interesting that you didn't see more and more companies attempting to own their global top-level domain. Like, I realize it's expensive. It's nearly $200,000 to sign up, or to sign up to get your application reviewed.
Yeah.
With no guarantees, and then you actually need to run the infrastructure yourself. But for multi-billion-dollar companies, really just buying this to make sure no one else can felt like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
But they couldn't, you know, if you don't have a legitimate right to the trademark, then you don't necessarily have a right to register .Coca-Cola if you're Jon Crowley, right? Like,
it would be nice if I could.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be an excellent retirement plan, but I somehow doubt that's going to pan out for me.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's in our POV as well. One of the factors to look at is, you know, do you have a unique name, right? Like Pfizer,
Yeah.
or do you have a more general name, right? You know, like Vertex or Millennium, and so that might help you decide whether you want to look at it or
Definitely. I believe you were saying, Brad, in an earlier conversation about this, that some people had commented on Apple's application that it was a common noun, so it would be very ridiculous to give them control of .apple.
Well, that's actually in the comments. So we're now in the comment period. Again, we've got a link on the blog to go to the ICANN comment section. And one of the comments is exactly that. You know,
And that's a tough one because did Microsoft apply for .Windows? You know, like it's and I believe with Windows they had a trademark dispute many years ago. Somebody took them to court arguing that Windows was a generic term that shouldn't be trademarked, and I'm pretty sure that they lost that because Windows is still trademarked. But it was an interesting case nonetheless, and so
Draw the line. But I have a feeling that's a larger conversation than we're touching on.
there's some things that start to kind of frighten me a little bit when I see things like .app being you know, paid for, or at least an application, and kind of wondering in the back of my mind whether those will go through.
and actually, .app is interesting because it has 13 competitors.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a bit of a bidding war there.
Yeah.
I would be shocked if Apple isn't on that list.
But you know, like it seems, I wonder how much of a money-making opportunity that is. Let's say you end up being the top bidder for .app, and then it becomes some kind of a standard, and everybody decides to, you know, pay whoever, Apple or Amazon or Google or whoever owns it, money to license .app names. Like it's just, it's really flipping the model of kind of who owns what in terms of names on the internet.
It's definitely taking domain camping to a whole new level.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really commercializing it to a level that we've never seen before. So I think it's a pretty sizable and important change to the infrastructure of the web.
I think that's a very good point. I mean, it does create another layer. Like, one of the big things that's a fear of anyone who's really interested in net neutrality is creating tiers on the internet and having like the premium tier and then the regular tier, and ending up with people not able to access or not having the right to access certain information. I mean, this could arguably be seen as the very beginning of that. Once you're getting to top level domains that are only accessible to the very premium brands with money to burn, is that giving them a special status above every other entity online?
But what operates against that is Google.
Fair.
Right? I mean, let's face it. If, you know, Pfizer will get .Pfizer, right? So .Pfizer and Pfizer.com, Google's not going to see those any differently, and they've stated that they're not going to look at them differently. So, you know, unless you're protecting your brand, it looks to me like it's going to be a no-brainer or a non-event.
It'll also really come down to consumer behavior, whether consumers start to kind of, you know, type it out in that way, or as we've been trained over the past few decades to constantly just add .com as the default. Like you can assume that whatever .com will probably work.
Yeah.
Or even the last 10 years where it's just been type it into the search box and just let it take you there.
Yeah.
Even if you know the .com, so many people just type in the URL into Google.
I think the strategy a lot of companies are taking is probably just to squat to figure out, well, let's get our name and then we'll figure out if we need to use it later. One question I do have from sort of a pharma perspective is there was one application for a brand name, which was Cialis, which also seems to me like a, you know, a squatting, you know, kind of proactive defensive measure, if you will, given that Cialis is used in a lot of spam and so on. It's probably a domain that you don't want to be taken over by spammers. The one thing I wonder is, could they ever actually use it? So what would they put before .Cialis that wouldn't be...
Well, you don't have to, that's the whole point, right?
So you just type in Cialis, that's it?
Yep.
So it's like an AOL keyword.
Yeah, it essentially becomes that. So if you type Cialis into your address bar, you'll just end up there.
The other weird thing about that is that it starts to screw up with the omnibar. So, you know, right now if you don't type in a .com or anything in Chrome or in the new version of Safari that's launching this summer, that just takes you to a search engine page. So they're going to have some kind of mechanism or DNS database to, you know, resolve against that. Either the search providers will have to be doing that, or
And the browsers. I actually tested, you know, because you can actually test it on some of the domains that exist now.
Right.
And IE, I think it was IE and Firefox and Chrome had slightly different behaviors. So yeah, but I mean, we have years until these start coming out. So the browsers will come to terms with that. Oh, and you know, before you go and take a look at the post that we have, the Treaty of Versailles is actually mentioned, and because of the Merck split between Germany and the U.S., the only brand name that seems to be in dispute in terms of pharma companies.
This was the first time we had referenced the Treaty of Versailles this month in the office, so it was fairly notable.
There was dancing far into the night. So we've had the next story in the wire that we want to touch on is the ComScore and Facebook showing effectiveness of social marketing. Not terribly surprising that Facebook wants to show the effectiveness of social marketing, and of course the report is all about Facebook. Let's be clear, because of the whole Chevy thing that was getting so much press. You have to understand that Facebook, after its IPO, was sort of in a dead zone where it wasn't able to talk for a while. So as soon as that timed out, they came out with their ComScore report. So do you think that this report, or do you think that a report showing that Facebook is effective is going to counteract the whole Chevy dumping Facebook?
I think Facebook's in quite the hole, not only because of the Chevy thing, but also by any reasonable judgment of what happened when their IPO hit. They were an overpriced stock and demand wasn't near where they expected it to be. I mean, I don't know how many tens of billions of dollars Mark Zuckerberg lost on paper in the space of 3 days, but clearly Facebook needs to start establishing itself as something more than just a fun story to be on the cover of Mashable or Gizmodo every other week. They need to start showing some real hard numbers. So I think this is really beneficial for them, but I do think they're in an interesting space. Because at the end of the day, Facebook is still a work in progress in terms of its advertising offering. They can show specific numbers through ComScore or through any other partner that say things are growing, but we haven't seen enough real case studies showing actual bottom line value from companies who are doing work on Facebook yet. And I think everyone's still kind of waiting to see that and to prove that this is actually the platform that's going to pay out when it comes to investing in social media. We still haven't found that platform yet. We're looking for it, but you know, the proof's in the pudding, and I think we haven't hit that mark.
Yeah, I think that the case of GM pulling their ads off Facebook was them, for example, saying, this isn't working for us, that in terms of the amount of money we spend here, we prefer to spend it elsewhere. So they weren't saying that, you know, the ads are totally useless, just that for them the ROI wasn't there. And I think that I have a hard time sort of generalizing the effectiveness of anything. It's always, it depends. So it's like, is Facebook effective? It depends. It depends what you're trying to do, what behavior you're trying to drive, who you're targeting.
Coffee might be good for waking me up, but it's a terrible sleep aid.
Yeah. And also, like in terms of ads, it comes down to the copy. Is the copy compelling? Are you targeting the right people? Is the image there, you know, attractive or interesting? And you know, are the people you're targeting likely to click on ads? I mean, I'm sure that there's some people that are less likely than others.
Yeah, and with the Chevy thing, the point I made a couple of weeks ago on the wire was they dumped Facebook, and they dumped the Super Bowl, by the way, and they picked up soccer, right? FIFA, and Manchester, right? They gained 25 million Facebook fans by picking up Manchester. So
that I would believe.
Right? So they haven't really dumped Facebook if Manchester puts their logo all over their Facebook.
Yeah, they've just dumped it as an ad platform.
Yeah.
And I think this is the thing that's interesting. I feel like Facebook is still optimized for person-to-person social interaction. So anything an ad does there is essentially a banner ad, but obfuscated. They're starting to try to create ways to inject brand behavior into the standard newsfeed and make brand behavior part of the way people interact on Facebook. I don't think they've nailed it yet, because the only real methods of interaction are still approximations of human behavior. I think it's really going to come into play at a point where a brand has different things to do on Facebook than a person. Currently, we've got brands kind of masquerading as people, and I haven't seen anyone really respond to that well. It still feels somewhat artificial. It still feels somewhat off. I feel like there's a huge opportunity if Facebook finds a way for brands to act as a separate entity on the platform rather than trying to fit them into the human mold.
Okay, fair. So, the next story we wanted to discuss a bit was tablet shopping Fueling couch and pillow commerce.
As you can see, we're all big fans of tablets.
We're not on a couch, we're on chairs, but we could be on a couch.
They're soft and comfy.
Yeah. No pillows in the office though. So what are your takes on couch and pillow commerce?
I think it's a shift in behavior that's really interesting. As much as computing hasn't been desk-bound for a long time, there have been certain behaviors that you would relegate to your desktop computer or to your laptop sitting at a desk. Shopping was definitely one of those things. As tablets become more accepted and more sophisticated, and as more and more websites, including e-commerce websites, are actually primed so you can use a tablet on them and order things, I've found more and more often I'm doing things on my tablet not because I prefer to do them on my tablet, but because I'm sitting and holding it anyways, and I should do the thing while it's still top of mind. As consumers get more and more comfortable to using tablets, and as opportunities to use them to make purchases on Amazon as an example get easier and easier, I can totally see purchasing shifting more and more to tablet behavior as it's less associated with being in the office and less associated with trying to get something more serious done.
One thing I'm wondering is, do you know, Brad, if this study looked at just sort of browsing type shopping behavior, or window shopping, so to speak, versus actual transactions or purchases? Because I'm curious to know if there is a difference. If I were to assume or hypothesize, I would suspect that there's a lot of people that probably do quite a bit of browsing on the iPad because of the style of device, but when it comes to actually making transactions, that they're a little bit more likely to do that on a desktop computer or laptop at this point in time. That's not to say that we won't see that type of behavior change as tablets become primary devices more and more at home.
Do you guys feel like data security could be one of the concerns? If people feel like a desktop is a more secure platform to order something online than a tablet?
The research I've seen doesn't seem to show that.
Okay.
People seem to be happy doing banking on their mobile phones, on their tablets. So I think Eric's question comes down to the definition of shop. Does shop mean that I go all the way to the end and hit the button on Amazon to get my books?
Right.
Or does it mean that I'm sort of browsing? And I think in consumers' minds, I can't speak for everyone, but I think in consumers' minds, shop means browse and fulfill. I mean,
I think that's fair.
So I think you're going to find the same percentage.
Yeah, I'm sort of thinking of my own behavior, and I know like I'll get emails from fab.com every day, right? And then I'll sit on my iPad and I'll kind of browse. But when it comes to actually buying something, although I do it from time to time on the iPad, if I have my choice and I'm like, oh, I'm going to go on and buy that thing, I'm probably going to reach for my laptop more than my iPad.
Now, is that because the forms actually just fill out better, like it's just easier?
Yeah, maybe. That could definitely be a part of it. A lot of sites aren't, although they display just fine on a tablet, there's still a little bit of that, like, filling out your credit card info is a bit more of a pain in the ass.
No, that's entirely fair. That's a good point, that this could be something assisted by making some careful UX and UI decisions.
And now, speaking of grabbing your laptop, next story we want to talk about is the Apple product announcements. So, the Apple guys all had this streaming video. I'm a PC guy.
Productivity momentarily dropped across.
Yeah, bandwidth spiked, productivity went down a bit, but we all found out what Apple was coming up with. So you wrote this section of The Wire in terms of what does it mean for pharma marketing. So.
Yeah, there's a couple of implications for pharma. I think the biggest one, and this will definitely be a trend in the coming years, as Apple moves their entire line over to Retina displays, and sort of PC manufacturers are going to try and catch up and do the same thing as they can. But Apple announced a new generation MacBook Pro that has a really high resolution display. I think it's one of the densest displays ever created. If you think of the 30-inch computer display that you used to have, this has the same amount of pixels on a 15-inch. So really, really sharp. But what it means for the web is that although text is automatically rendered at a much higher resolution, image content actually looks, you know, a little bit pixelated because it seems fuzzy. So there's a lot of sort of talk right now about how are we going to be adapting CSS and other kind of coding techniques on the web to take into account high resolution displays. And that's, you know, whether you're on the new iPad that has a Retina display, or an iPhone or any other phone that has a high resolution display, or now, you know, laptop computers. And as we see that move to desktops and other you know, applications, I think we'll see a lot more applications of, you know, the need to have high resolution imagery on the web.
Okay, yeah, and especially with CSS, if you're measuring everything in pixels, that you could get into trouble.
Yeah.
So you want to start measuring in variable units like ems.
The other thing is that, so Apple announced iOS 6, which is the next version of their mobile operating system for iPhones, iPod Touches, and iPads. And one of the key sort of implications from a marketing perspective there is that they've revamped the design of their stores. This is the App Store, the iTunes Store, and the Bookstore. And what this can mean for pharma marketers is that if you have an app that's available in Apple's store right now, that you may have to go through another regulatory review on this. There may be some implications in terms of, although there aren't a lot of, or basically none, branded pharma apps out there, if you do have one, or if you're planning one right now, you want to be aware of how safety information may be displayed in this description, you know, any changes to the layout and things like that that would need to be taken into account. And the last thing that I think is worth mentioning is just the new Passbook app, which provides sort of a centralized wallet for things like boarding passes, loyalty or savings cards. And the first thing that came to mind for me from a pharma perspective is, you know, we've been talking quite a bit about mobile copay cards and those types of offers that you can just have with you on the go and bring to the pharmacy. But there's probably a lot of opportunities here to have mobile copay cards living within this app and make it really convenient for patients to actually sort of access that offer and keep it stored in a convenient place. So that's something that we'll be keeping an eye on for sure.
Cool. So the last thing I'd like to talk about today is our last story in the last wire. Half of consumers like mobile health, but doctors seem to disagree. So the study actually shows that about half of consumers have no problem with the idea of looking up health information on their mobile devices. And we have to remember that, you know, 80–90% of users are already looking up health information on, you know, whatever device. Doctors, on the other hand, while doctors over-index for technology for their own use, they're not really in favor of this behavior from the users. I think most doctors have come to terms with patients looking stuff up, so I don't think it's just that. There must be something about looking up stuff on mobile that the doctors are worried about.
Mm-hmm. I think mobile's specifically worrisome for doctors because it opens the line for communication much more. I've seen fantastic responses in looking at companies like Hello Health in the States is a great example. That's a group of doctors who actually built a set of tools to allow them to communicate using mobile and actually do like on-call visits. That said, when really the beta test, which founder was a man named Jay Parkinson, I believe, when he finished medical school and began doing this, he actually got pulled aside and checked on repeatedly because people weren't comfortable with someone setting up their visits via a mobile device, communicating with patients via iChat, for example, using a Google Calendar to schedule meetings, and sending them like PDF receipts. So there's an appetite there for people to use these things, but there's inherent distrust in the medical community and in the regulatory community of something that's done heavily digitally, even if it's not entirely digitally. So I can see that being a reason doctors are trying to reduce their involvement of these technologies in their day-to-day practice.
Mm-hmm. And of course there's the billing issue.
Definitely.
Right? If I'm a doctor and I get to bill if you come to my office and I talk to you, but I don't get to bill if I'm talking to you online, then let's face it, I'm a business. I'm going to need to have you come in so that I can actually bill for that time. Otherwise, it's all dead time to me.
Mm-hmm. Entirely fair.
I think there's probably a bit of sort of conservatism here too, in terms of fear of new technologies and how it's going to change things that are perceived to work, well already. And anytime there's a new technology that's sort of a disruption to a market, there's that knee-jerk reaction to either kind of dismiss its importance or to sort of be afraid of it, and I think that both of the being afraid of it or just being cautious about it is definitely an okay reaction to have. But it's funny because I'd suspect that if you look at the average age of physicians is older, let's just say, and although they've embraced mobile for their own uses, like the stats on physician use of mobile devices at point of care are pretty staggering. There's still that fear in terms of the way that they practice and the relationship that they have with patients, it seems.
The specific thing that I think is worth calling out is that the finding is that 64% of physicians worry that mHealth makes patients too independent. And I find that an interesting point to touch on, just because independent, in my interpretation, essentially means cutting the doctor out of the situation in certain times. Right. If you're taking a picture of something and looking it up on an app, for example, and then deciding, I have this, and then rushing out and trying to address that, essentially it ignores the fact that it takes a lot of skill and a lot of time and effort and investment to be able to actually identify and address these problems. If the main worry of many of these doctors is just that people are cutting professionals out of the equation and attempting to diagnose and treat themselves, I can definitely see why this is a worry.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, doctors aren't necessarily worried about educated patients coming in anymore. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to self-diagnose and run off and do something that may or may not work, that is a concern. And with the doctors also, do no harm, right? So they're already fairly conservative. So when, like Eric was pointing out, when this new technology comes along, they really do want to take it slow and make sure that they're not going to be putting the patients at risk by doing these types of things.
And it's a reasonable approach, as much as I always like to do whatever the newest technological thing is right away. It doesn't mean it's always applicable.
Well, Eric, John, thank you very much for this week's fireside chat, so to speak.
Thank you. Maybe next week we'll have a fire.
Maybe. Well, hopefully
we should look
not.
into that.